Hey guys, welcome to the Contend podcast. I'm Michael Allen here with my co-host Dennis Cole. Also with us today are David Blalock and David Kim. Super excited. This is our first videoed and recorded Contend podcast, and I'm actually just going to jump straight into it. Our first topic for today is actually going to be on the topic of fasting. Want to demystify this conversation a little bit as far as like what is fasting, why fasting, biblical foundations for it as well, personal experiences. Actually really privileged to be in a room with three other men that have a lot of personal history in the place of prayer, in the place of fasting as well. So I'm just going to jump right into it. First question is, why fast? Isn't that an Old Testament thing? So I'm actually direct that to David Kim, probably as the first question. Like, what is fasting in the place in the life of a New Testament believer?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we talk about a lot is fasting, and that's actually one of the most common questions that we get is, what does fasting look like in the New Testament and for the New Testament believer? And one of the things that we try to do as we're dissecting that is just specifically even look at the life of Jesus. He starts out his ministry with a 40-day fast in the wilderness. This is the inauguration of his ministry on the earth, but also his inauguration of the church age. You know, John the Baptist, who preceded him, lived a lifestyle of fasting, but even Jesus will look at John and say he was the last of that prophetic era, and he was inaugurating a new era, but he began it with fasting. And he, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, not if you fast, but when you fast. There was a clear expectations for his disciples to fast, even though the Bible is clear that they did not fast during his ministry on the earth, you know. But the expectation was that after he would die, resurrect, and then ascend, that they would continue on in fasting. And we see that in the life of the early church, their fasting. We see that in history, but we also see that in the book of Acts as well.
Sure. I mean, David Blalock, you've been on college campuses. You went to Lee University, graduated around 2016, I believe. And in the midst of all your time on different college campuses, going, you know, through campus to campus from literally coast to coast, I think you probably agree with me here that this is a question we've kind of gotten a lot. Like, why should I fast? Like, why is that even important today? So just even kind of bouncing off of David Kim here, why would you say like that is important for specifically like a college age student? Sure. Now?
We often see in the, you know, if you're looking at the book of Acts, you know, before Paul is sent out, it's in a, you know, David referenced it, but says in this place of worship and fasting, they get this power, authority, unction, whatever it is, to send Paul out as a missionary. And so for a young person, many of us growing our lives in God, asking what our calling is, I think it's on a personal development standpoint, it's one of the most important things you can do in your college years is to give yourself to a life of prayer and specifically fasting, adding fasting to it. Because oftentimes in the midst of fast, you know, if you look throughout church history, if you look throughout revival history, and obviously the Bible, that it's in seasons of fasting and prayer,
right,
that you see people receive calling, you see them receive clarity from God, you see them receive personal breakthrough that launches them out, like Paul, right? So it was in the midst of this worship and fasting season that Paul gets sent out as a missionary, goes on to be the guy who writes 13 books in the New Testament, advances the gospel, right, you know, at that point to the known world. And so for us as young people who are asking, you know, one of the deepest cries of our hearts during our 18 to 22 years is, hey, like, what the heck am I supposed to do with my life? This is why everybody changes their major 10 times, right, when they're in college. And really, it's more than just what do I want to do, but when you come before the Lord, I believe in fasting, giving yourself to a fasted lifestyle in your college years, it's saying, God, I am making my life available for you to speak, for you to intervene, and I'm removing myself from the equation, dying to myself, even in the place of food, so that I can have more of you and more of your desire for my life.
That's good.
Yeah. You know, as I hear you guys talk about how important fasting is, you know, the question that naturally springs into my heart is, why do you think this isn't better known? Like, I heard Bill Bright once said that he considered fasting to be the most important of Christian practices or disciplines. And, you know, Bill Bright, he's the founder of one of the largest missions organizations in the world. But just being real, when I talk with leaders of his organization today, it doesn't sound like there's a huge value for fasting. Most of the people that I run into on college campuses don't have much of a value for fasting. How do we get to this place? I don't know. I'm just speculating here. I'm asking for some speculation. What has happened that we've lost such an important discipline? And Michael, maybe I could direct that to you first, man.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know there's multiple facets to this, but I think one example is because it's not necessarily modeled as much. Obviously, there's not a huge blanket statement, but it's not modeled as much in our churches today. And so when that's not modeled, as far as corporate fasting, I think that's something we each have experience in, is what does it look like to do not just a personal fast, but even corporate fasting as well. It actually, when you see other people doing a fast, it actually encourages you yourself to likewise do that. I think we, even as a community here, have a weekly rhythm, even of fasting together. We fast together on Thursdays. And I think when that's not modeled in the church or even in families, like when you think of that kind of the microcosm, so to speak, then for the college age student nowadays, especially like Gen Z, if they're not seeing that modeled, then they're not really going to have a grid for that. Because I mean, I know there's so many biblical examples of that, but if you're not actively looking into scripture, like, hey, I've seen this say like in my own parents' lives, like I want to know that for myself. Like, what does the Bible actually have to say about what my parents are doing or my pastor is saying? And so, you know, I think that's one element. I'd love to hear maybe David share some more about this, but I think that's one element, is that it's not actually being practiced from a very, very public view, maybe in our churches as much, depends on the church, but then also in the family as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely needs to be more faith and vision behind fasting, but because that's what initiates it. It's the desire, right? And so they need to hear stories, biblical stuff, testimonies, how it works. But we always encourage people to do these bite-sized fasts. You know, it's very difficult to look down the barrel of a 40-day fast and say, this is going to be my first fast. Let's get radical on this. Let's get all my youth group on this. It's very difficult. I mean, that's 6-7 weeks that we're talking about, and it's just hard to keep track. We would do these things where we do, 36 hours, 48 hours, 3 days, and we'd get people into rhythm, and we'd always do it together at a church in a lock-in format. So there's this corporate experience of everyone being hungry together, and then everyone entering into prayer together. And that way, there's not this sense of, man, am I the only one who's hungry? I'm the only one not encountering God. Like, I don't even want God right now. I just want food. And so we just having these bite-sized steps, even for kids at a young age, even in high school, doing these little, things are totally, I think, are good steps to get your feet wet. And then also with college students, we always say, do a Daniel fast. Don't try to do a 4-day water fast. Even a 4-day juice fast while you're in school or working, it's just so difficult. It's so monstrous, right? And so just giving these on-ramps for people to experience it, and then to experience that breakthrough, the intimacy or whatever it is, that gets them wet, their feet wet, so to speak, for the greater things,
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm actually curious, from a college campus perspective, from college campus ministry, David, how would you say, like, going about, like, getting that to, like, bite-sized chunks? Because I think that also might be one thing too. Like, you think in your mind, like, oh man, I've never done, like a day, without food, much less a 7-day water fast. I think it could be intimidating. So people are just like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I don't have the grace for it, whatever language you want to put on that. So I'm curious, as far as like the practical, like, how do we take that and make that like bite-sized chunks and like applicable and practical for our students? I don't know, David, maybe you can speak into that, just even your experience at Lee with the prayer room there.
Yeah, I think 2 things. I think one is we have to say it from the front, right? I don't have a memory, at least in my church growing up, great church, I don't have a memory of my pastors or my leaders talking about fasting from the front, giving people vision and desire, right? Or even permission. I think for a lot of people, even for a lot of people listening to this podcast that may have never fasted before, they've never had another young person say, hey, you can fast while you're a college student.
That's right.
And you're not in full-time ministry, or you're not the pastor or leader. And so for me, it was a permission thing. So I think one is giving them permission. And then on a practical, giving them what you're talking about, Michael, a bite-sized chunk, and saying, hey, start with 1 day a week. Just start with 1 day a week, sun up to sundown. Just seek the Lord, take some, drink some juice if you have to stay awake or whatever. And just start with 1 day, and I believe the fruit of that 1 day, right? Then they come to you as the leader and say, man, that was really hard, or God did this or this or this. and then it creates hunger, right? But it's like they feel like they can win with that one fast rather than saying, boom, 40-day fast. That's what fasting is. And they quit after a weekend, and they're like, I'm never doing that again. That's not me, right? But I think giving them permission, giving them vision, and then giving them, like you're saying, Michael, a step one.
Okay. On this topic, I'm curious. Do you guys remember your first fast or like your first major fast?
Yes.
I'd love to hear like what was it like for you, and was it hard for you, or did it feel like wow, this is so life-giving? I'm curious.
Yeah, I remember it clearly. I mean, I grew up in a Korean church, so fasting is in the culture, right? But that first fast, I remember what we did was we called a 3-day fast before our youth retreat. This was my first experience in fasting. And back in the day, I had never heard of a Daniel fast. I never heard of a media fast. I learned that, later on, but Koreans are hardcore. If you're saying you're fasting, it's a water fast. So we called it a 3-day water fast. We met at the church every single day. We prayed. And I remember being incredibly hungry, but I remember us feeling just so desperate, because so much of your time is spent eating. So much of your fellowship is around food. Yeah. And our fellowship was more centered around the presence, when you're fasting. And us going after God together. And I remember, immediately afterwards, we're at the retreat and we're seeing God break into kids' lives. We had about 250 kids in our youth group. God saving souls, just the most unlikely souls. And so when you see that when you're 17, 18, you're like, I don't want to do this any differently from that point on. Now, that's a very particular case. But there was something about it, out of a 250 person youth group, it was maybe 15, 20 of us.
Wow.
But it was something about the coalition of the hungry, so to speak, that got together that marked our hearts forever. So it doesn't take many, honestly. You don't have to get the whole group fasting. You just have to get a couple friends, get in the room, take 3 days and seek God and watch God show up.
Yeah. How about you, David Blalock? You remember your first fast?
Oh man, mine's classic. So I was listening to a podcast actually, or a online teaching thing from Lou Engle. I didn't know who Lou Engle was. It was after my first year of college, and I had participated in some like day fasts or whatever during college, but never any sort of extended fast at all. And it was just like, the classic thing when Lou speaks, it was as I was hearing him teaching on fasting and fasting for nations and breakthrough, there was something inside of me that just started to burn and awaken. And I'm 19. I was literally back in North Carolina. It was a North Carolina summer. I was probably, I worked in a factory this summer, all summer long, no air conditioning. It was probably 100 to 105 degrees every day. And I'm just listening to Lou Engle podcast, and I was like, I have to fast. I have to do it.
Come on.
And so I didn't even know about any kind of fast other than a Daniel fast. So I was like, this is going to be a huge deal for me to do Daniel fast. And so I started a Daniel fast, and I would pack beans in the morning before I left, and then there was a Bojangles right beside the factory, and I'd go and I'd get pinto beans and French fries for lunch and drink sweet tea. And I was like, I felt so holy. I was like, man, I am really laying it all down. But
by the
during
way,
that,
if you're listening, don't ever do a Daniel fast like that.
But I remember thinking, I was like, man, like I would just stack wood and pray all day for God to raise up prayer in my city, in this little remote area in North Carolina. And I remember during that time that there was actually several prayer groups that I had. I'm 19 years old. I have no influence. I have no leadership, right? But during that time, I found out about 6 months later that multiple prayer groups started on the college campus in my hometown and in the area, in churches. I mean, it was spontaneous moves of prayer that was being raised up, and it ruined me, like you're saying, David. Even the week fast, week first fast ruined me. Yeah. But it was definitely Lou who got me.
Yeah.
That's so good.
How about you, Michael? Do you remember?
Yeah, well, I can't remember my very first fast.
You were born fasting, weren't you, Michael?
Probably. Yeah, I fasted for 9 months in the womb. Didn't eat any real food. I think the first fast I have memory of, at least that's coming to mind right now, I was actually at the call. I was in DC in 2008. Wow. And so I think I was like 13 or 14. So I know it wasn't my first time actually ever doing a fast, but we were there. Actually, no, sorry, it was 2007. We were in Nashville. So we were fasting the whole day. It was this big stadium gathering, thousands of people there. And my main memory is like, man, I was famished during that day. Like, it's hot. We had like life tape over our mouth. So like, I'm not even able to drink for like a few hours that I had like the tape on my mouth. Yeah. And I honestly, like, I didn't even really understand like what's my fasting accomplishing right now. I just knew it was important.
Yeah.
But like what you were saying, David, I think that like even the weakness of that fast, like I know the Lord used in so many people that were there that day, including myself. So like that was a catalytic moment for me. Like the Call National in 2007 was really such a transformative and also pivotal day, really, as far as what happened for them personally and even this as a nation. And so that probably was one of my earliest memories as far as like doing a fast, even though it was only for one day.
Dude, that reminds me though, my actual first fast, I gotta change the story up here.
Yeah.
Was it was the Call San Francisco. Were you there, Dennis?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was there. I must have been
Wow.
13 years old. I wasn't saved, but my whole church went. Like 200 of us. They got buses and we all went. And we fasted for the day, and it was the longest, coldest, most miserable day of my entire life. And
You
I
weren't even
remember
saved
right
and you were
before
fasting.
us, right behind us, they're just full-on family with a picnic blanket, and they're eating the entire day. And I'm with all these little Korean kids, and we're fat, and and some of them are, all the older kids are crying and stuff, and we're just like looking at each other. We're like, dude, I am so hungry. It is so cold. And that was my first fast. It was a forced fast.
Yeah.
It was forced.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just share mine because as I'm thinking about it, like if I'm honest, I think my very first fast was when I was either sophomore or junior in high school. And it was the Lord telling me, don't play video games anymore. So it was like a video game fast. And I did that for 6 years. And at that time in my life, video games were like the idol for sure, and so that was a really big deal. But that one was interesting because I didn't take it as a fast. I thought the Lord was commanding me never to do it again. You know what I mean? So it was a real surrender of an idol. And if I look back in my life, if there was a single decision I made that was probably like the best decision of my life other than coming to Christ, right? It was probably that one, just being real, because that is the decision where I said, Lord, you're more important to me than this, even though I love this.
Come on, that's good.
And and that set up, I think, the rest of my walk. It really set me on a trajectory where the Lord really started to show up in my life in major ways. And I always questioned myself because I would look at some of my friends in youth group, and most of my friends in youth group are not really walking with the Lord anymore. And sometimes I think back, Lord, why did I experience a lot of the things that I did, or why did I have these things happen? And I do think that some of it had to do with me making that decision to give God my most precious thing, and I just want to say that I think that is a type of a fast. The Lord gave it back to me 6 years later, but that was it was life-changing for sure.
Yeah, well, even on that note, I know so you talked about like a video game fast, and then like there's Daniel fast that we've been talking about. There's so many different kinds of fasts, I feel like. So maybe we can just talk about that just for a few minutes. Like, what are the different types of fasts? But then also for you guys personally, what have you felt like has been one of the most effective or even beneficial for you personally, as far as just your own just like rhythm and lifestyle of fasting? So I don't know, David Blalock, if you want to hit that question first.
Yeah. I think definitely along those lines, Dennis, whenever I saw some of the largest personal breakthrough in my life was whenever, having to do with media and entertainment, right? So, entertainment fasting of different kinds. I remember there was a season in college where we were going into, I'd been fasting at this point, but we were going into a fast, and I felt so clearly in my spirit to not watch Duke basketball for the duration of this fast.
What a sacrifice.
It was a big sacrifice, right?
That's huge for you, bro.
That's huge. It was huge.
That was your Isaac, man.
Because I knew if I wasn't there standing in the gap for Duke basketball, we weren't going to win the championship. That's just the truth. And so, but whenever I did that, I incorporated that into the food dimensions of the fast. It was Duke basketball, but it was broader, right? It was entertainment, it was movies, it was that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It creates, you realize like how much time you waste. Right? You realize how much time you waste scrolling or watching highlights or just like vegetating, right? And it almost creates this inward like, God, I'm bored. Like I have nothing to do but talk to you, right? I have nothing to do. And then it creates connection between you and the Lord in a deeper way. And so more of your time is filled with more of him. And so to your point, Dennis, I do think, and as we called other young people to that type of a fast, I think for me personally, adding the media dimension in this day and age to food fast is so powerful. I mean, it's just, I've said this back then, but I said, man, what could God do on our campus if everybody on our campus got off social media for 40 days?
That's good.
What would God do? And instead of going to social media and entertainment, we went to the Bible and we went to the prayer room and we sought him. What could he do?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good.
One of my life-changing fasts, not related to food, was I was in high school. And I said, I'm not going to listen to secular music, any secular music. Actually, when it came down to it, I stopped listening to all music. And at the time, I loved music. I was the kind of guy who had his headphones in all the time. And I didn't listen to music, but especially secular music, for about 3 months. And after that, to this day, I don't listen to secular music. Now, that's not like a commandment from Scripture, right? But it is, Paul does say, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. And that was kind of the spirit and the heart I had going into this fast. And what people don't realize is that music is a powerful tool, right? I bet right now, for those of you guys who did listen to hip hop growing up, from a certain generation, I could say "Lose Yourself" and the whole intro, right? I could actually do it right now, or certain songs, right? That you grow up listening with, you just, there's cues, and what you don't understand is you're being discipled consciously or unconsciously by this music, and there's a spirit behind, even the very sound that's going forth. And so it really transformed my life, where I just went on a blackout, and like to this day, I just haven't had a desire to listen to secular music. But what I did was I challenged all these other high school kids, because a lot of ways that they would, medicate, even back then. And that back then, YouTube had just started. Music was where you would zone out and you would just be you. Their lives were changed. And I think even today, the music today is even more seductive than even the music that was in our generation in one sense. And so I would encourage that too. You don't think about it because it's not visual. And most people, when they think of distraction, they think only in the visual realm. But, even the things that are more auditory, they have an influence on your level of hunger for God, for sure.
That's so good. Dennis, what about you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. The most powerful fasts for me have been the ones where I really felt burdened by the Lord to do them. And there have been several different kinds of those types of fasts. I will say I do media fasts really often. Like, my general rule of thumb is anything that I feel like is hindering me, if I sense that it is competing for my affections with the Lord, then I'm just like, I got to cut this off for a bit. You know what I mean? And that can be true for so many different things. When I was in college, I did a celibacy fast, right? I decided I'm not gonna date when I'm in college, and to be clear, I think it's okay for people to do that. I just felt burdened by the Lord to do that. And I think that was so important and effective for me. It was so helpful for me, in that season of my life. And, I've done a number of juice fasts. I hate, like, there are lots of fasts that I hate. Juice fasts, though, for whatever reason, I have felt a little bit more grace to do. First of all, I don't have to I don't have to think too hard. Like, when I'm on a Daniel, I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking like, is that Daniel?
So those fries.
Like when that line's not clear, what I mean? I'm tempted to push it. You know what I mean? So, like, I like fasts.
Pancakes.
I like fasts that are a little more clear. I want to draw those lines. And so the juice fast, for whatever, is more clear in my mind. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I know I can have this, and I can have this, and I can have this. And I like on the juice fast, I kind of like protein shakes. I'll do that. And so it's not like I feel like crazy weak. But I have done more extreme fasts, and I don't know. I feel like some people feel like they have grace for fasting. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I'm one of those people. I just feel like Lord, I love you. Please see how much I love you, kind of thing.
Yes. Even in the weakness, like, Lord.
Yeah.
My wife was asking me today, like, hey, do you want me to pick you up like a smoothie from Jamba Juice, for lunch? I was like, unless I'm fasting, I'm going to steer away from just getting this smoothie. Like, I'm going to have Chick-fil-A for lunch today.
Same price.
Just pretty much, same price, exactly. I'm like, I've now so associated, like, going to get a smoothie, like, okay, I'm on a juice fast. I'm like, I pretty much exclusively reserve like smoothies for fasting day, and so like I won't on other days. I won't.
For sure.
So I think for me, just to also speak to this question, I think there's been so many different seasons where I think, to your point, Dennis, like I realized like, man, I think this has crowded out my love for the Lord in this season. Whether it has been like movies, Netflix, other seasons, it has been just other forms of media. For me, also even just sometimes food. But it's not just like, hey, what am I cutting out? But I think the intentionality to replace it with time with the Lord is so important. And for me at least, I realize I can very easily kind of fall into the thing of like, okay, I'm fasting, so I'm not eating today, or I'm not on social media for a week. And then I just go about my life. I just go about my day. And it's not an actual seeking of the Lord more.
Yeah.
I'm not actually replacing that thing. I'm just abstaining. And I think for me, it has to be like every single time, like, Lord, I want more of you. I'm abstaining from this, less of this, so I might have more of you.
Absolutely.
In this way.
Come on.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear from you guys a little bit. Like, for me, when I fast, I'll notice a number of things. Like, a lot of times I notice more keenness in my ability to feel God. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I can feel his spirit more. Right, I feel like I could feel heart burden more. So those are that's why I'll fast. I'm like, God, I need heart burden for this, and I'll go on a fast to get heart burden because I know it. I just know from experience it helps with that. I'm curious, are there things that you guys feel like when you're fasting? Are there practical things that like, yeah, this is why I fast. It really helps me in this sense.
Talking more at a personal level?
Sure, on a personal level, yeah.
Yeah, I think with that heart burden, part of it is also revelation that, there's so many. David mentioned this earlier. Paul is at Antioch, and they need to make a massive decision on the missions movement in Antioch, and they turn it into an atmosphere of prayer and fasting, right, where there's prophets and teachers. And I think there's been so many times where my wife Audrey and I have had to make a major decision for the ministry or for our personal lives where we've gone into seasons of extended fasting. I mean, Contend is here today. I think when I look back in the history, because Audrey and I were on a 110-day fast. We did a 110-day Daniel fast out of pure desperation. It wasn't like, man, we're so holy, God's moving, and we just want him to keep moving. No, we didn't know what to do. Yeah. We were like, God, everything that we're doing, it feels like a waste of time. Like, I've done so many trips back to back to back, and it seems fruitless. I need an answer right now. And so we went on a 110-day fast out of Psalm 110. Wow. Where in the day of thy power, your people shall volunteer freely. Your youth shall be to you as to do that passage. And by the end of that, it was this sense of a gaining of confidence in the things that God was speaking during that fast. So it's not just the revelation, it's the faith. Right. And so even Jesus, when he says this kind cannot be driven out but by prayer and fasting, some commentators would connect that with their level of faith. They didn't have faith, so Jesus rebukes them for their unbelief. In order for them to get that faith, fasting and prayer was part of it, right? And so I found that in these fasts, you don't just get the revelation or like you're saying, the heart burden, but you get confidence and faith that this is what God wants to do, and this and you can leverage all of your life behind that, And so there's so many other corporate stories I can tell with that, but just want to encourage, just when you're feeling that, go to fasting. Finney said, when I felt the fires of my faith wane for even a day, I would go into the forest to fast. And when he felt lacking of faith for revival, he would just set apart a day just to fast and pray. And I feel like that's one of the most motivating things for me personally.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because when I talk with young believers, a lot of times what I hear from them is like, man, I'm just not feeling it these days. Like I just feel like I feel apathetic. And oftentimes, like, if you can impart faith to them to like go on a fast, like to do a fast, to lay something on the altar, right? This is the way you can spark like a quick fire in your heart for the things of God. And I just want to say that to young people, because a lot of young people really struggle with waning and waxing vision, where your vision's going in and out and in and out. And sometimes you get in these places where I just don't feel like I have vision. And I just want to encourage you, get into a lifestyle of fasting. Learn to fast in those moments to keep your vision somewhat steady.
Yeah,
that's good.
Oh, that's so good. I'm curious. I'm sure even just already kind of sharing some of these stories. Do we have any good fasting fails? Like stories are like, man, that was not my brightest moments, or this did not go the way I planned it. I know a couple of the stories already, but I don't know. David, do you have any that come to mind as far as fasting fails?
Fasting fails. Are you thinking of a specific story you want me to share?
I don't know, the strawberry milkshake fast in college. I remember, and that and popcorn.
Fasting fails. Oh yeah, like my entire fasting life. Well, yeah. So there was this one time, growing up in the South, we don't, my family didn't eat very healthy. The whole idea of, fasting. I remember I came home one time. I told my family I was fasting. My dad goes, "You're not eating?" I mean, it's like offensive to a Southern man, if your son is not eating. I said, "Dad, Jesus fasted." He's like, "Well, Jesus was magic. What are you talking about?"
That's awesome.
I was like, "Oh, this is bad." So, but yeah, that whole fast, that was a smoothie fast. But my smoothie fast was chocolate milk, strawberries, and bananas, and peanut butter, and it blended up again and again, day after day. I threw some like V8 juice in there. That was pretty much it. Like that was it for like 21 days on this smoothie fast. I remember another time, this was probably like the ultimate worst one. It was actually my last semester of college. And our housemate in college, one of my best friends, he works here with Contend with us, his name's Kanan. And he goes off to one thing, and he gets this prophetic word that me and him are supposed to do a Daniel fast, basically the entire semester. And a Daniel fast for him, he grew up missionary kid, pretty cultured, salads, well-rounded, rabbit diet, and but a Daniel fast for me was like eggs and salsa, chips and salsa, cookout late at night with like fries and barbecue and ranch and sweet tea, and that was like
popcorn for a snack.
Yeah, popcorn for a
this
snack.
man did not know what an avocado was until he went to college.
Oh gosh,
this is where he was at.
His first time eating a carrot, he ate it like an apple and didn't know how to eat it. And it was like, what's this core? Like, I didn't even know like a carrot had a core until he started like eating it like that.
So what happened during that fast, because I was in my last semester of college, finished up my theology degree. I was actually engaged. We were about to get married. And I was eating that every day, along with about like 8 cups of coffee because I wasn't sleeping, right? We were doing prayer stuff. And then all of a sudden, I just could not get out of bed one day. Like I was bedridden, and it was like there was like something stabbing me in my stomach, like a fire in my stomach, and I couldn't move for like several days. And I got diagnosed with like severe stomach ulcers because of how I've been Daniel fasting.
That's horrible.
And I was like, Kanan, this fast is over, man. You keep doing it. I'm done here. So that's my ultimate fasting fail is not dieting right on the fast.
You guys get to learn on this podcast that the do's and the don'ts about what to do during a fast, especially like Daniel fast.
Yeah.
I had to learn from experience, especially on liquid fasts. Never trust a fart, and I'll leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that. Any more will probably be TMI, but
there has to be a scientific word for fart.
Flatulence.
Flatulence.
Do not trust your flatulence whilst on a fast, on a liquid fast. It comes in a liquid, goes out as such, and so that's probably on. I've had to learn from experience on that one, but I don't know, David Kim, any
Yeah. I definitely have a story on that, but before we get to that story, fasting healthy is important. I don't know if we're gonna hit that in this podcast, but there was 2 years where 4 times in 2 years I gained 60, lost 60, gained 60, lost 60, gained 60, lost 60.
Wow.
Just because of the cycles of intense 40-day fast that we were doing, and I gain it back, not in 40 days, but I gain it back over the course of maybe 4 or 5 months, and then I go another 40, lose 60 pounds, and then so you definitely don't want to do that. It kills your metabolism. But this is a fond memory. No, it's not a fond memory, but it's a good learning lesson. It was my freshman year of college. I was preparing. I was going to preach somewhere, and so I went on this 10-day water fast, and I was like, God, I want to see revival. Like I want to see breakthrough. When you're younger, it's and hopefully as we get older, we get more desperate. But that was just my mindset back in those days. So I fasted on water for 10 days. Did the service. It was awesome. God broke in, and then afterwards I had In-N-Out. And so I broke in multiple fasts on In-N-Out, and this was the worst one. And it felt great, for about 45 minutes. And then for the next 3.5 days, I'm going through massive stomach pains. And nothing's coming out. Like, it's just everything I'm eating is just all stuck and backed up there.
Oh, no.
And in my desperation, I didn't know what else to do. I went to the store and I got orange Metamucil, which is for like 70-year-old people who can't go to the bathroom. And I had like 4 or 5 servings of orange Metamucil just to try to flush it out. And it was a horrible experience. I spent the next 2 days in pain just taking Metamucil And the long story short is you never break a 10-day water fast on In-N-Out. But that was probably my worst fasting fail in the world.
Oh my gosh!
But I'm alive.
Yeah,
praise
God, man.
That's the act of the Lord.
I mean, that's probably a good segue. What are some principles for like on ramp into a fast and off ramp out of a fast?
That's good.
No, that's good. Maybe I can just kind of kick us off because again, we're talking about different types of fasts, right? And so the type of on ramp that you're going to do is going to be dependent upon the fast. So maybe just most basic level Daniel fast. You're still eating food. You're just not doing meats, sweets. If you're going maybe a little more hardcore, no like gluten or dairy. So I mean, as far as on ramp, that's typically pretty easy. You're going to detox even during, say if it's like a 21-day Daniel fast, you're going to be detoxing during those 21 days. But leading up to it, you want to kind of start weaning yourself off of sugars, really high processed foods. Yeah. And I mean, you do that pretty much in any fast as you're like leading up to it. So I'd say probably with a Daniel fast, it's not as intensive. You can do like a few days before, as far as just that starting to wean off of those things. And then when you end the fast, don't just go get like a sugar high, like day one and like, well, now I can have a whole cake. And now I'm done with the 21 days. Ease back into it. And who knows, maybe there's some healthy lifestyle or healthy habits that you pick up during your fast that you're like, I don't think I'm going to be doing, sweet tea again. I don't think that'll ever happen to David Blalock, but No.
Well, sometimes you just have to just declare that you only live once. And just go ham.
That's Korean style right there.
I know. I mean, it's like Korean style is after the 40-day Daniel fast, all you can eat Korean barbecue.
Oh my gosh. Bulgogi. Sometimes you just deal with the repercussions. Yeah. We're doing the healthy on ramps and off ramps to fast. Yeah. I don't know, David, but maybe with a water fast, can you speak to that a little bit? How to best prepare, best practices if you're doing a water or actually water and liquid fast, if you can maybe speak to that.
Well, I think one thing that blew my mind in college when somebody like explained to me like, oh, like a 40-day fast can be graduated, right? Which even that idea, if you're doing a more extended fast, you can graduate it. So what I mean by that is that it's kind of like a triangle, right? It's kind of like you ramp up on the front end and you hit a peak in the middle and then you kind of ramp down so that by the end of the 40, you can eat solid food, right? If it's like a primary juice fast. So somebody introduced me to that and the steps are, typically it's Daniel, eating more clean foods. Mm-hmm. Daniel, maybe you do that for 5 days. You do juice for 10 days, right? So you have your, maybe just say 5 to 7 days eating clean, mm-hmm. right? And then you go from that to you have some juice with some fiber in it still. And then you transition from that juice to maybe you do like a 3-day water fast in the middle. And then out of that water fast, you go back onto juice. Then you go back onto Daniel, and then by the end of the 40, you can pretty healthily and safely transition off. You can do that also, if you do all 40 days juice, you can do, really easily digestible foods on either end. Mm-hmm. But the graduated fast, I think, is a great thing because it really allows you to transition on and off in the context of your fast, and I feel like it's helpful.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'll just speak to a water fast real quick. First of all, shout out to Lou Engle. He's our spiritual father. He's done so many 40s, I can't even count. But I've done privileged to done a lot of different types of fasts with him. But that 40-day water fast, or even a 21-day water fast, what you have to realize is that by day 6 or 7, 8, your system is shutting down, and your body, the human body is beautiful. I mean, just look at the dudes here. But it's a beautiful thing. It completely renews. I mean, it almost like dies and it gets rebirthed in terms of an extended water fast. And so obviously the break-in is really important because if you want to help the cleansing process, do it earlier, right? Don't have caffeine in your system, sugar or fat in your system. Go 5-7 days out. but your body's renewing itself. It's shutting down. Your stomach is shutting down. So it's really the only period of your living life, which is what the definition of life is. It's the only period of your life where you're actually not constantly processing food, right? It completely shuts down, and your body's actually cleansing out. Your liver's cleansing out. Your pancreas is cleansing out. Your kidneys are cleansing out. And so even during a water fast, there's some cleanses that you can take that won't add calories. So it's not like you're helping yourself, but they're helping the cleansing process. And then coming out of it is, we always recommend extremely slow. Like David said, in terms of the graduated fast, you're taking that and a little bit of an extended level with the water fast, and you're beginning to break down, introducing not too sugary juices, but liquids. We'll start with a very, very, very light vegetable broth, and we'll begin to work our way back in, and then introduce grains. But the big thing is when you come out of a water fast, you do realize, although no one I know who's done a water fast, maybe except like 3 or 4 people, have actually learned their lesson, but you realize how sugary, how salty, how fatty processed foods can be.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can actually come out of that and have your entire taste buds rebooted and live a healthy lifestyle. Most of us don't do that, but it actually is it's a work of God, not just at the heart and spiritual level, but at a physical level. There is even if you look at more secular studies, medical studies, an extended fasting is actually, there's proven health benefits to it. You just have to come in right and then exit right, and then live a lifestyle afterwards that's conducive for your body.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And I know that's speaking to the physical, but maybe Dennis, if you can just touch on what should you expect emotionally, even like spiritually, like during the midst of a fast? Because I know for me, like if I'm doing like maybe a shortened, like just liquid fast, like in addition to feeling hungry, I'm going to be feeling sometimes like maybe more, not antagonistic, but maybe more like a little on edge, like especially if it's the first day or two. So I don't know, maybe you can just hit on that a little bit as far as what to expect spiritually, emotionally during those days.
Yeah, I mean, it people get hangry. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You get hangry, and like, last time I did an extended juice fast, I had to have a talk with my wife, because I was like, I was getting annoyed easily, and she's like, kind of mad at me, and I'm kind of mad at her, and that's the reality. You kind of have to have some grace on yourself and on those who are fasting, because it's hard. It's legit hard. And one thing we haven't touched on, but look, one thing I've noticed is that there are times where I'm doing a fast and I just feel the grace of the Lord on it. You know what I mean? Like I'm not thinking about food all the time. I'm really like able to connect with God well. It just feels like really, it feels great. And then I've had fasts where I feel like there's like no grace on it at all.
Yeah.
True.
And I'm just miserable and angry, and and I mean, just being real, I'm more likely to either end a fast or change a fast. If I feel like there's like no grace on it and I'm like dying on it or whatever, I'll sometimes change my fast, and I'll talk about it, with my wife or something. But for me, that's one of the things I do. I'm not saying you should necessarily do that, but I try and do that, especially if I'm on like a corporate fast. I try and join in on every national corporate fast. You know what I mean? If there's a national corporate fast, I'm going to try and join in. But yeah, some of those fasts, like sometimes I don't feel that much grace on it, and I'll just pull back a little bit. You know what I mean? Hey, I'm doing juice. I'm going to pull it back to a Daniel, and that way I'm not going to kill everyone around me and like, not destroy all my relationships and stuff.
Especially when you're younger, you fast out of zeal. So every fast you want to go intense after God. And there's been so many times I've changed a fast because that's not what the Lord wanted me to do from the beginning. Other times, sometimes the Lord's like, you pray about it, and the Lord's like, no, you gotta finish this one. But going back to your first point, I'm reminded, Alan Hood shared a story. Alan Hood, he was a leader at IHOP in Kansas City. I've never forgotten the story where he said, he was processing with the Lord. He was fasting. He was angry. And he said, Lord, why am I so angry when I fast? Yeah. And the Holy Spirit spoke to him and said, Alan, you are always angry, but you just never see it. And essentially what the Holy Spirit was saying there was, sometimes fasting brings out sin in our hearts that we have to deal with, right? Or issues or things like that. And they come to the surface, and And in that place, I haven't forgotten that because, I definitely get irritable on fasts. Sometimes when I'm about to go into an intense fast, you definitely have to talk about, if you're married, you have to talk about it with your wife because it affects everyone.
Yes.
You got to cook separately. I mean, it's a different deal, right? But, I've just kept that in the back of my mind as like, man, I know that I'm hangry, but it's not, I'm like especially hangry. This might actually be something that's inside of me already that I just haven't dealt with. And so those words from Alan have kind of changed and shifted my perspective even, because I think we all deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's so good. It's honestly a type of crucible. Like you realize like, oh man, like right. I'm just trying to be holy here, in the midst of my fast. And I'm like, but I'm getting irritated. I'm losing my patience, like these different things like, oh, this is actually an opportunity for the Lord to use this as a crucible to actually continue to purify me, to actually continue to bring out even the fruits of the Spirit. When my flesh is weak, like then He is strong. And so it's actually an opportunity, volitional weakness, to allow the Lord to have even more of us and allow Him, because again, fruit of the Spirit. I think I've realized this, like the fruit of the Spirit is not the fruit of Michael. Like the harder I try typically, like to try to be more loving, to be more patient or kind, on those days I end up being like almost the exact opposite because I'm trying to do it out of my own strength. And then being able to actually, from a fasted place, say, Lord, I can't do this on my own. I need you, Holy Spirit. Amen. Have all of me, have your way in me. And would you produce the fruits of the Spirit, as it says in Galatians 5, in and through my life. And so on that note, and I think one of the last questions for today, just wanted to talk about a phrase that we have within Contend is the fasted lifestyle. What does it look like to have a fasted lifestyle? If we talk about even the Nazarite consecration, the Numbers 6, it's not just like, okay, hey, we like 5 days, 10 days, or 21 days like this month, but it's actually, how do I have an ongoing fasted lifestyle? Dennis, you were talking about this, I think, earlier. Maybe just start us out, because you were talking about like, hey, whenever I feel like something is taking the priority of the affections of my heart, I feel like the Lord like highlights that and I have to cut it off. And so I feel like that already kind of speaks a little bit to that. Maybe you can talk some more about that.
Look, I mean, all of us get tempted at times. I've deleted Instagram 5 times. It's currently not on my phone. You know what I mean? Because, and then I download it again because for ministry, it's always for ministry. You know what I mean? I'm like, I got to be faithful to reach young people for the Lord, And then I just found myself looking at like pictures of watches and stuff that I don't, and I'm just like, it starts to pull me, right? And I'm just like, I don't want to deal with the temptation of these things. So I just cut them off, right? I cut them off all the time, right? So with like video games, I still cut them off. I have like right now I'm doing a fast where I only play video games with other people, right? I'm not going to do it by myself. You know what I mean? So I'll do lots of little fasts here and there, but it's just a constant safeguarding of my heart because I'm like, God, I've got to be close to you. That is the dream of my life, and anything that threatens that, I have to cut it off, And so I think that is, when we think about fasting, we can fast anything, right? We could fast certain relationships in our lives, right? We can fast that are unhealthy, right? We could fast, we could fast certain activities, right? We could fast, obviously, food, like we've been talking about mostly today. But just this idea of being willing to cut off everything that gets in the way, right? Like I'm not going to allow anything to get in the way. Good. I'm not going to allow anything to sneak in to grab the affection of my heart, right? And I say this, with a warning also to young people, because a lot of people don't understand there is a dynamic where you can begin to idolize things in your life.
Yeah.
And that will kill your relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
It will kill your vision. It will kill your destiny in God. And so I try and encourage people, be ruthless with those things. Anything that would try to take the place of the Lord's, leading in your life. And I just want to say, for some people, it's career stuff, right? Sometimes you have to cut off aspects of your career, right? Yeah. Sometimes, like, whatever you feel like is getting in there, that's really the heart of I think, living a fasted lifestyle, right? This Nazarite lifestyle that we're talking about, being willing to do whatever it takes to keep God first in our lives.
That's good.
So good.
I remember whenever I was in college, it was my sophomore year in college. I wasn't leading anything. I wasn't, doing anything for the prayer room at that time. I was just serving. I was just there. And I remember hearing about the holy clubs, the John Wesley, George Whitefield, Charles Wesley in England, and hearing about how they would fast in their college years, 19, 20 years old, they'd fast twice a week. They'd just take 2 days. They committed their lives to a lifestyle of fasting where they would take 2 days out of the week and fast. And I said, man, I want to do that. And I remember I started doing that 2 days a week. I didn't tell anyone. It was really that, just fasting in secret thing. And that season, kind of to your point, Dennis, that season of just, because it felt like I was always fasting. Even though it was only 2 days a week, it was like my fasting day was over and then like the next one was up again.
Yeah.
And it did something to my heart. It kept my heart pure in a way, and it kept my heart open to the Lord in a way that it produced something in me in that season. Whenever it wasn't just this big 40-day fast, but it was that day-to-day faithfulness that you're hitting on that produced something inside of me. And in the next season, I was launched into leadership, and I saw this, all this stuff happening on my campus, but it was from that place of lifestyle fasting. And I remember in that season, I was doing that fast twice a week, and I had a dream, and it was one of the coolest dreams I ever had. Only time I've ever heard, like the audible voice of God in a dream. But in the dream, it was like, really dramatic, like, the clouds and God's voice thundering or whatever. And I just remember he just spoke audibly in this dream and says, why wouldn't you give everything now?
Wow.
That's good.
Why wouldn't you give everything now? And I knew that was in response to and in an encouragement for me in that fast to live that fasted lifestyle and say, hey, why wouldn't I just give my life, like my lifestyle, to fasting and seeking God now, right? Because it's obviously such a limited time we have here on earth, but it's such a valuable use of our time, the lifestyle fast, I believe.
That's so good, David.
Yeah, I'm convicted from that dream. That's so good.
Me too.
Yes.
I think with the fasted lifestyle, there's a principle of restraint that's holy. And people might call that legalism, but I call it love. There are things that are no-nos if you're married or dating or whatever. But there's a lot of things that you do not just push the boundaries as far as you can, but to stay as connected and intimate as you can in the context of marriage. And I think the same is true of the Lord, that there's a principle of restraint. And I think in Christian maturity, you experience, the freedom of the Lord that goes all of your days, but there's such an intense experience of freedom in the Lord, in your early days of salvation. It's the freedom from shame and condemnation and bondages and addictions and religion even, right? But as you mature, I think there's an aspect of discipline that comes in, where you understand it is for freedom that Christ has set you free, therefore no longer be slaves to sin. Where you now begin to discipline yourself. You look at the most gifted athletes, the most gifted men or women, and they're people of discipline, right? And to understand that, I think, is then to look at your lifestyle and say, there are choices that I'm going to make that I don't have to make, but I'm going to make them because I want the upward calling in God, which is sanctification, but it's also your calling, your destiny. You look at Tom Brady, who's 44, he's the GOAT.
44?
He's 44,
Wow.
43, 44. Just won a Super Bowl championship. Good as he's ever played. The guy has not eaten a tomato or a fried food, I think, in like 15, 16 years. Right?
Tomato.
It causes inflammation or something like that. My point being is he's modeled his life to reach the pinnacle of his craft. Paul says, I beat my body and make it my slave so that I might not be myself disqualified from the prize, because others, they wrestle for a crown that is perishable, but we work for a crown that is imperishable. And so, there's so much to learn, I think, in not just enjoying our freedoms that we have in the Lord, but also, we can eat anything as Christians. We're not under the old covenant. But then love propels us to say, I'm just going to cut off these permissible pleasures for a season, and I'm going to set my appetite on the Lord, right? And so there's just this aspect of Christian maturity I think is lost today in the American church, Western church, where we want as much individualism and freedom as possible without restraint,
Yeah, I think just to kind of tie this together, and Dennis, you phrased this so well, but just anything that would hinder love. Again, but the reason why even we are fasting, it should be a love-driven pursuit. We're not. It's again. I think that's another thing that, to go back to the very first question, like why isn't it as much as prevalent, so to speak, amongst the younger generation of Christians, is because it has been. I think it's come off as legalistic,
Sure.
like, oh, it's a legalistic
Right.
tradition that you're supposed to do. Whereas for the Christian, even if you go back to the number 6 Nazarite lifestyle, it says if any man, woman so desires, it's a desire based,
Right.
like, Lord, I so want you, I so love you that I want more of you, and I'm willing to give up the permissible pleasures of the world in order to have more of you. And so I think, just to kind of close out this time as we're talking about fasting, just a reminder for our audience as we're talking about this, that this is a love-driven pursuit for each one of us here. When we're talking about, like, man, like, it's again, Psalms 139 says, search me, O God, and know my heart, try me and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. If there's anything in us that would inhibit us from loving him well, that would actually distract us or take us off path. I mean, Hebrews talks about casting off the sin and also everything else that easily entangles. It's not just sin. It's like actually everything else that would trip us up. That I think is what we are trying to communicate here as we continue to share about fasting, the fasted lifestyle. And so just encouragement for you guys, if you are hearing this and your heart's burning within you, like maybe you haven't fasted before, or you're like, I've tried it once or twice, didn't really seem to do anything for me, I encourage you guys, start in that bite-sized chunk. Just maybe take a day. Maybe it's a Daniel fast for like a couple of days. Maybe it's just liquids or juice for 24 hours, but take a day to seek the Lord, to actually get those other things that might be a distraction out of your life and really pursue him wholeheartedly. We're going to continue to talk about topics such as this, about fasting, prayer, revival, current topics as well, things that are going on in our nation. So I'm really excited. This is just the first of many more podcasts to come. We'll be having other guest speakers on as well. If you guys have any questions or any topics that you'd like to actually see us talk about or hear kind of our thoughts on, email us at hello@contend.global. We'd love to respond to your questions or even kind of consider the topics that you feel like, hey, this is what I'm encountering right now on my college campus. We'd love to hear you guys talk about this. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being on this podcast today, for getting to talk about fasting, fasted lifestyle. Until next time, see you guys.